Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jasmine Hodo, and today my speech will be on Christopher Columbus Day. So, here my presentation. We start off with let's continue to celebrate Columbus Day, or not. Thank you. So, who is Christopher Columbus? He was born on October 31st, 1451 in Italy. As a young teenage boy, he went on many voyages across the Mediterranean Sea. He was a sailor. And once he became of age, like most Europeans, he decided that he wanted to go on more voyages in order to get riches and spices and other high dollar items that were pretty hot back then. So once he became of age and he decided that he wanted to start sailing professionally, he decided that he wanted to find a route to Asia, a new route to Asia. So what he did was he went to the King of Portugal and the governments of Genoa and Venice. He went and he basically asked them for funds and ships and manpower in order to go on these voyages. So they all told him no. They all rejected him. So next he went to the King of Spain and Queen of Spain, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and he asked them for funds as well. At first they rejected him and they told him no. But then he decided to concoct this great plan that he would go and tell them that the King of Portugal was considering his offer. So instead of Portugal being the first to go to find a new route to Asia, Spain wanted the glory for themselves. So finally, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella told him yes. So they funded his trip. They gave him 3 ships and plenty of manpower. They gave him the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. Those were his ship names. And in October of 1492, he set sail. Several weeks after being at sea, Christopher Columbus landed on the island of present-day Bahamas. So why does Christopher Columbus get to take all the credit? Christopher Columbus opened up a whole new world for European expansion and colonization. During this time, the cities in Europe were overcrowded, they were dirty, they were disease-filled, there were things going on like the Black Death, all types of things were going on. So, of course, the European countries, they wanted somewhere new to go and colonize those areas and move all the overcrowdedness and the diseases out of their areas. So, there began the race to the riches. So Christopher Columbus, he was a racist, a murderer, and a menace to those who inhabited the land he quote-unquote discovered. And the true story of the disgusting man should be told. So who is the real Christopher Columbus? Number 1, he didn't discover America. Number 2, he was a murderer, a bigot, a racist, and a menace to society. And that's why we should celebrate Indigenous People Day. So, we've all heard this saying before. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but there were others before him. Next slide. So, first we have the Irish monks. Back in the 6th century, led by Saint Brendan, supposedly they traveled to North America, but this could only be proved by a scribe, so it's not very credible information. In other words, it probably didn't happen. Then we have the Vikings, which is the most accurate account of history. And this actually can be proved that the Vikings, led by Leif Erikson, they founded Vinland, which is in Canada. They came over and they stayed for a few years, but it was rumored that he was ran off by the Native American Indians due to war and things like that. So then we also have the Chinese, which is also not a proven theory. But in the 15th century, it is said that the Chinese came led by Zheng He, and they discovered North America as well. And that can only be proved by shipwrecks that were in the ocean. Next slide, please. So, the facts. What we know for sure is that the indigenous people that Christopher Columbus found, aka the Indians, when he came over to North America, they were there first. And it's you could tell that they've been there for centuries just because of the way they lived, the homes they already had. They were farming. They had their own technological advances, which may not have been as great as the Europeans. However, you could tell that they've been there for a very long time. So, history books tell a disturbingly false account of the actual events that occurred, and they most certainly forgot to mention the horrific things that Christopher Columbus did to the native people that were on that land. Next slide. In my opinion, Christopher Columbus, he was a con artist. Stories such as him mutilating slaves, which were the Indians that were over there, he enslaved them, he mutilated them. If they tried to escape, he would burn them alive. He fed babies to the dogs as food. And he would send dogs to chase slaves and rip off their limbs as they cried out for help. So, in order to end rebellion, Christopher Columbus will wage war on the Indians. In a letter to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain, who funded his trip, he talked about how they didn't have weapons and they were very scared of the Europeans that came over with Christopher Columbus. They were very timid people and very afraid. They had no weapons, but yet these people came over with guns and all kind of deadly equipment, and Christopher Columbus used this as a torturing tool in order to keep the Indians scared. So it's also said that Christopher Columbus slaughtered towns. He slaughtered many towns, and he brought many diseases such as smallpox, measles, influenza, which the Native Americans had no immunity to. This was also known as the Columbian Exchange, where there was an exchange of plants, animals, and goods between the East and the West, which is comparable to our modern day biological warfare, because with those plants and animals that they brought over from Europe came their diseases from Europe. So now all of the land and the people are now getting infected with things that they've never been exposed to before. Next, we talk about Christopher Columbus. He was a slave owner. So not only did he sell the Indians into slavery over in Spain, as well as force them into slavery on their own land, he forced them to work in gold mines. And if their quota wasn't met, he did things like cut their hands off and tie them around their neck to send a message to the other Indians that they need to work faster and get as much gold as Christopher Columbus wanted. There were reports of mass suicide from the Indians because they felt as if they were being treated so badly that they would get together by the hundreds and just commit mass suicide. They would all kill themselves because they couldn't live with what they were being put through by Christopher Columbus. So when he came over, he also talked about in a letter how he would seize the Native Americans because they looked like they would make good servants, which was his logic behind that was what he read in his Catholic Bible. Christopher Columbus was a Catholic. So he forced them to work for his profit, and he sent many Indians to Spain to be sold. However, most of those Indians that he sent over there to Spain to be sold, they died on the way. So that is where somewhat of the theory comes in that African Americans started replacing those Indian slaves that they were taking over to European countries to be slaves. They started using African Americans because the Native Americans were dying by the hundreds and thousands, so they couldn't make it over. And Christopher Columbus, he was a racist and a bigot. His Catholic law forbid enslavement of Christians, so to solve that problem, he just refused to baptize the Native Americans. He not only forced them into Christianity, but then he wouldn't baptize them in order to go by his own godly law that they couldn't be slaves and Christians at the same time. Also, a very horrific story that I've read about is that Christopher Columbus allowed his men to rape many young girls from the ages of 9 and 10, he wrote in his journal that his men liked the young girls. They didn't like the older women anymore. They were looking more for the younger girls. So that's pretty disgusting. So he's also a racist because he just saw all the Indians as slaves, which he told on many accounts in his letters that he wrote to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. The barbaric, horrendous things that Columbus did were no secret. He kept a journal, and it's out for the world to see. Next slide, please. So, Columbus was a disgusting person and should not be honored by false history and horrific acts against humanity. And that's why I believe we should be celebrating Indigenous People Day. I feel like we should be paying respect to those who suffered a great loss of culture, their land, their ancestors, their history, and their tribes. They were the true discoverers of this land. It's morally wrong to celebrate a man that encouraged slavery and murder and rape and all sort of things, all the reign of terror that he gave to the Indian culture. So Indigenous People Day is celebrated in a few states currently. It's celebrated in Alaska, Hawaii, Oregon, South Dakota, and also a few cities such as Denver, Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, Seattle. Basically, these cities and states, they decided that they no longer want to recognize Christopher Columbus for the real truth of what he did to those people. And now they want to celebrate Indigenous People Day to pay respects to those who lost a lot. And next. So to sum it all up, Christopher Columbus was a real jerk. He's no saint, no hero, no great adventurer. He was not the first to discover America. The indigenous people were there first, as we have seen. As well as, if we want to even take it before Christopher Columbus sailed, we could say the Vikings were there first. So why should he get the credit for that? Also, he was a racist, a bigot, a murderer, a rapist, and a list of many other things that we can give him, a thief and whatnot. He was a lot of things, but great and a saint. Also, I feel like it's a disgrace to celebrate a holiday that honors a man who did such horrible things and caused such suffrage on humanity. So why was he really here? Christopher Columbus was greedy. He wanted land, and he was promised by the king and queen of Spain to get 10% of whatever profits of whatever he found in America. And he was just promised to get 10% of it, so he was greedy. Who's to say that he actually brought everything that he took from the Indians back to the king and queen? He kept, I would say that he probably kept most of it for himself. So the king and queen, they actually funded 3 trips for Christopher Columbus before he was arrested and brought back to Spain because of the many complaints he was getting about the way he was governing the land over in the Americas. So once they brought him back to Spain to make him stand in court, stand trial for his crimes, they ended up just giving him a slap on the wrist and letting him go. They just stripped him of his right to govern the Americas. But then they funded a 4th trip. He wasn't allowed to go back as governor. However, the greed got the best of everyone, and they decided to let him continue to go over to the Native Americans and cause them more suffering. So I ask of you, would you celebrate Columbus Day if these were your people? What about if you heard the true story of Christopher Columbus before the so-called great voyage he took to America? Is this the role model that you want for your children? So I ask you, let's boycott the holiday for Christopher Columbus. I ask that we boycott the holiday, defend affirmative action, petition the school board that the textbook should tell the real story of Christopher Columbus. And if they don't want to tell it at such a young age, take the story out completely and let's wait till kids get older, maybe in their high school years, in order to give them the truth about what he really did. And then I ask that we celebrate Indigenous People Day. Let's pay homage to those who were actually here first and they suffered. And let's just give them their respect that they deserve, because even now today the Indians are still suffering and having things taken from them and not getting what they deserve in return. So, do you guys have any questions? So, do you guys have any questions?
Yes.
All right. What's your question?
Do you think the truth will traumatize the children?
I think the truth would traumatize the children. That's why I say that we should probably wait until they get older, maybe in their high school years, or when they're being taught about like the suffering that the Jews had with the Nazis. Maybe we should wait till those types of discussions come about to teach children things about how Christopher Columbus really was, just to keep it G-rated. Any more questions?
How do we boycott Columbus Day?
So I feel like we boycott Columbus Day by maybe doing a group petition. I feel like we should do a petition and maybe petition the government and ask them to get rid of the day or change the day to pay homage to Indigenous People Day. Or we can ask for a second day of celebration for Indigenous People Day. I feel like we should partake in no activity that has anything to do with Christopher Columbus Day. Any more questions?
Why do you think they don't teach the real stuff in school?
I don't think they teach the real stuff in school because it's been taught for so long that Christopher Columbus was this great explorer. And yeah, I say the one good thing he did for America was he opened the doorway for more people to explore, but I still don't think that should give him credit for being the one to discover America, because as we said, there were people here before that. But I think it dates back to our history of the things that people don't want to talk about, like slavery. No one wants to talk about when African Americans were enslaved, and of course no one wants to talk about the Indians being enslaved and tortured and things like that. So I think it's one of those tough pills to swallow for America, and they just have to suck it up and get over it. It happened, and we've all overcome, and times are changing and things are different now. So I think that it definitely is a time to start talking about these things that happen in history and stop trying to place it on the back burner. So thank you everyone for coming to my speech. I hope that you all decide that Indigenous People Day is a better idea than celebrating Columbus Day, and that is all.